We came here to build the new Chicano movement. That's what we came here for. We came here to build the new Chicano movement. That's what we came here for. Bryant.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Sports as a Weapon podcast, a Chicano sports podcast on the entanglement of sports, radical politics, and working class sports fan culture. And don't worry, we talk about sports too. We're having another episode. We're getting these rolling now, trying to get these done. So excited for this episode. This is supposed to be like a year in the making. And then I procrastinated, got busy, baby, and then I just didn't do it. But their book's been out for a year. You guys need to check it out. It's been about a year. It's a great book. Just won an award, so he goes to talk about it too. But I'm finally excited to have Nathan Kalman-Lamb on the podcast from the End of Sport, and welcome back Derek Silva from the End of Sport. He's probably like in my 15th or I don't know, one of my early episodes. Derek came on, talked about NIL and stuff when it first happened, and now they're here to talk about their great book, The End of College Football. It's a great book. As a trained cultural anthropologist, I really love the qualitative research, all the interviews with people. I think he did like 25 interviews with student athletic workers, football players, college football players. So very excited. So you guys, let me do my little spiel intro real quick, and then you guys can introduce yourself. So Sports as a Weapon is part of the ANTICONQUISTA Media Collective Network. ANTICONQUISTA is an anti-imperialist media collective. Our content is produced by and for the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. We are dedicated to exposing and fighting the capitalist imperialist system, the root cause of our displacement. Subscribe to the ANTICONQUISTA Patreon at patreon.com/ANTICONQUISTA and follow ANTICONQUISTA on YouTube, X, Twitter, and Instagram. Also, be sure to listen to our podcast. Listen, subscribe to the Sports as a Weapon podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google. Oh, there's no Google no more. I still have it on my notes. And wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to the show, Nathan and Derek. Finally have you on to talk about this great book. And if you guys could just talk about yourselves real quick in the book before we get started.
Miguel, thanks so much for having us on. It's a real treat to be here. And we love your project in general. So, I'm excited to get into the book, but just really briefly about myself. I am now an associate professor of sociology at the University of New Brunswick in Canada. But I did teach for 6 years at Duke University, which was, quite formative for me, and especially in terms of the project of this book. So I certainly draw on that experience, and I'm happy to sort of try to weave that into our conversation about the book too.
Yeah, and I'm delighted to be back. My name is Derek Silva, full prof of sociology at King's University College in London, Ontario. I also have my own experience, which we talk about in the preface of the book, as a grad laborer and instructor at the University of South Carolina, which sort of framed a lot. I think both of our experiences at Duke and South Carolina framed our approach to the book. And Miguel, I just wanted to say I appreciate the anthropology shout out. Nathan and I have long talked about how this was actually much more anthropological than it was sociological, which we don't frame it as such in the book because our audience is, and our, our discipline is soc, but we definitely made, we tried to be much more deeply ingrained and amplify the realities of our participants rather than, be an outsider gazing in as much as possible. So we appreciate that. I'll call out.
Yeah. I hate how sociology, you do all these interviews and then it's like one line where you're like, many of the people we talked to said that they didn't enjoy their time in college athletics. It's like, really? Is that what they said? That's all you got for us? No, let's hear what they said, right? That's what the contribution is. That's what the intervention is, actually hearing these voices that, haven't emerged, partly because it's dangerous for them to talk. So like actually the benefit of academic research is that you can grant anonymity and then people will speak much more freely. So we got to hear them when they speak. We can't just silence them and then replace them with our own little fucking takeaway.
I love it, man. When I was choosing switching majors, I used to be a business major in undergrad, and then I took some like ethics class on business, which still didn't really wasn't too convincing on ethics and capitalism. But that's actually what really sparked. I don't want to do this no more. F this, and then I pretty much decided with sociology, anthro. For some reason, I went with anthro. So that's what sociologists and anthropologists do. We do a lot of. I know sociology does a lot of quantitative too. But do a lot of those in-depth interviews, and that's what I really enjoyed about this book, because that's what I know. And I just loved the interviews they did with the athletes, the student athletic workers, and just what they spoke about. They were, and I know you guys talk about this. You talk to mostly, most of the players are black players, and then you guys are white. So you pointed that out in your introduction, so that was appreciative. That's you got to know. And then I think you mentioned the anthropology in there a little bit, maybe like the edict versus edit kind of thing. I don't think you said that, but it was something to that effect. Just being in there, the researcher, getting into those spaces with these athletes, and them opening up to you is very important. I didn't play college football; I just played high school. But reading this book brought a lot of memories back from playing high school football, because it's the same thing, just college is just the next level. But just the method, just the way everyone's conditioned, coerced. Now I think about it, I'm like, we were exploited as high schools, because we're in high school in the U.S. football is the number one program usually that makes a lot of money for an athletic department, right? Just like in college. And I just thought about all those times I missed class because it's and all these, you practice all late. And it just brought some of those memories back. So that was good to read in there, those experiences I could kind of relate to myself. So very excited to get into this. So let's get into those questions. So in your guys' book, The End of College Football, how are student athletic workers exploited through the labor, not only as athletic workers, but as the NCAA calls them, student athletes? What challenges do they face when having pretty much two jobs? They got to play football, which is really the full-time job, and then they got to be students as well. How do the structural conditions negatively impact them in the classroom? And how did your book really explore this question, these issues?
Derek, you want to start talking about the economic side, and then I'll circle back on the educational piece?
It's a great place to start. Okay, so keep in mind that this book, our interviews were conducted during a period before the House settlement. So before campus athletic workers, which we prefer that term as opposed to the colloquial slur of student athletes. So campus athletic workers who may now be able to be paid directly by their institution. We were writing this during a time where that was not the case, and NIL had just been sort of just emerged as a frame through which, or as an opening of doors through which campus athletic workers could receive some remuneration for extra work that they were being conducted. So not all of our of the participants that we talked to, all the campus athletic workers that we talked to, experienced NIL. Most had not. So this is a little bit, some of that has to be preface this conversation, that things have changed a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you think of the economic exploitation that happens under the kind of old regime, and it's not completely solved, by the way, house settlement, pay for play does not solve much of this, that campus athletic workers bring in a great deal of revenue. We're talking billions of dollars for institutions, not just their universities, but also for the sports media complex. There's a whole microeconomy of people who are able to benefit from the labor of campus athletic workers, who are not paid, who are supposed to accept a scholarship as remuneration for their labor. This is heavily racialized, as we know, that the average student population or the proportion of students who are Black in universities in the primarily white institutions that we conducted research within, or I guess around, was 5.7%. But on many, or the average for many Power Five, now Power Five football and basketball teams, the sort of revenue generating sport is upwards of 55, 56%, sometimes as high as 70 or 80%. So these folks who suffer this economic exploitation, who are not allowed to receive compensation, or were not allowed to receive any form of compensation to play in exchange for their labor, it's heavily racialized. So understanding this as a system that is embedded in racial capitalism, that's part and parcel of racial capitalism, that's reflective of racial capitalism, is super important to understand the racial transfer of wealth, as it's been called. The economists Ted Tatos and Hal Singer have empirically demonstrated that this system, the NCAA system, generates between a 1.2 and a 1 or has generated between a 1.2 and 1.4 billion dollar transfer of wealth from Black people and racialized folks to primarily white institutions and the entire kind of economy that surrounds college sports, that's an annual. We're talking billions of annual racial transfer of wealth. So all of this has to be we have to identify, or highlight the fact that this is a racialized form of exploitation, that yes, it affects all campus athletic workers, but those campus athletic workers who bring in the most revenue are primarily Black and racialized folks.
Yeah, and just to hit like a couple more quick things on that before I circle into the education piece. I mean, one, as Derek started with, because, he was, I think, rightfully prefacing that our research was done prior to this current moment. We have all this flux in the college sports space, obviously. And so, people's the traditional frame for talking about exploitation in college sport is economic exploitation. And so people want to say, well, listen, there's money flooding into the sport, therefore problem solved, right? And so, of course, most of our book is essentially why that problem is not solved. But even if we want to talk about that particular piece, and again, Derek and I welcome money flowing to players. If money's flowing, it should be flowing to players. So there's no way in which we're like suggesting that NIL is bad because money is going to players, or the house settlement is bad because money is going to players. Those are the best things about NIL and the house settlement. And we want as much money to be flowing to players as possible in a professionalized system of athletics. Okay, so that goes without saying. But a couple things we should caution. One, the NCAA has once again regulated NIL. So although we had a kind of free-for-all moment for about a year, and now we're back to them like vetting anything over $600 is going through a very careful vetting process. So like, we got to caution how much money is going to be flowing to players through the NIL avenue. And then the house settlement is supposed to be quote unquote revenue sharing, which is to say a wage ostensibly. But again, that's capped at $20.5 million a year. Ohio State's athletic department generates like $280 million a year. 20 million? Are you kidding me? That's peanuts, right? And in the professional men's leagues that are comparable, like let's say the NFL, we're talking about 50% plus revenue going to players. Okay. So this is a tiny fraction of that. This is nowhere near the same
the NFL,
universe.
The revenue share is much more. It's still not an equal playing field because you got the billionaires versus the players, but they have that revenue share. Same thing like an NBA, it's like 50-51%.
Exactly. That's got to be the target number. And if we're not near that, then we're talking about like vicious exploitation, because as all three of us here know, the bottom line is this commodity spectacle is produced by these players, which is to say all the value is produced by the players. So why aren't they getting 95%? They should be, because you can cut out those owners and they can immediately broadcast this spectacle directly to us on Netflix or whatever else, or their own platform. And guess what? People are still going to watch because all the value is being produced by them. So it's all exploitation. But let's come to the education piece, because I'm really gratified that you asked that question, because for us, based as Derek and I both have started this conversation saying, our experiences in U.S. academic institutions were really formative for us in terms of wanting to engage this process. Why? These were our students, right? Like literally, these are the people who it was our job to teach. And so seeing how the educational aspect of their experience was kind of foreclosed by the institution was profoundly damning to us, right? Because it was like, this is supposed to be what the entire process is about, ostensibly. If it's going to be housed, if you're going to have athletics housed within higher education, then it has to meet the foundational conditions of higher education. And that is academic freedom for students, like the nurturing, the learning experience for students, that all has to be, a baseline for what's going on. And if it's not, something is profoundly wrong in the state of Denmark, right? Now, the other piece to that is, prior to this particular moment, we also have to understand the actual compensation for players as acknowledged by the college sports system was their education, right? They were saying, we're going to furnish you a scholarship in exchange for your labor. Everyone agreed that that's what was going on. And at Duke University, that's like $86,000 a year. So that's like $460 or whatever over the course of 5 potential years. That's a lot of money, ostensibly, right? So you can see why the universities are like, listen, we're paying you. The argument that Derek and I make is that actually they're not paying you, because the education that the athletes receive, not because the athletes don't deserve to be there, aren't capable of it, or even because they're cheating. None of that. No, because of the actual structure of the way that education is provided to players, they're simply not receiving the full value that other students are receiving. And because of that, it's a systematic form of wage theft. We can think about this in a few ways. I mean, the most obvious one is, how much time do players get to actually spend in the classroom? Now, this, again, is something that Duke University themselves actually contemplated, okay? They have a strategic report from their athletic department, which is about 15 years old now, where this is during the moment when ESPN was trying to expand so that games were not just going to be on Saturdays, right? But we're going to kind of colonize other nights of the week because there's more money to be made. And Duke was like, listen, we know that if our players start playing on Wednesday night and Thursday night and Friday night and traveling to those games, they're going to miss a lot of school. It's definitely going to undermine their academic experience. And that's bad. But on the other hand, we're going to make a lot of money. So we're going to do it. Okay, they say that. They say that explicitly. The only reason we're compromising the education of these students is so that we, the institution, can get a lot of cash off their backs. That's what's going on here, right? So students who are traveling, miss class time, nothing you can do about that. We have practices that are scheduled often, let's say mornings or afternoons, right? And if you have practices scheduled in one half of the day, you're taking no classes during that period of time, right? So that means that an entire half of the classes offered by your institution are suddenly not available to these players. That's not academic freedom. We also have a practice called academic clustering, okay? This is where the athletic department itself steers players into classes that they perceive to be less challenging. We don't accept this premise. All 3 of us here, right, have gone through the humanities and social sciences, and we view those to be valuable academic experiences. But from the standpoint of the institution, and to a certain extent these players, the STEM classes are where the most value is. And a lot of these players, they were recruited to tech. We literally had a player recruited to a tech institution, right? His parents were sold a bill of goods by the athletic department, by the coach. The coach is like, come to our school and be an engineer. We have an amazing engineering program, which is true. And so the parents, the student are like, yeah, great stuff. That's why I want to go to that institution. They sign up, they come, they enroll. As soon as they're on campus, absolutely not. You're prohibited. You're prohibited from being an engineer. We don't have any of our football players be engineers.
I'll take too much of your time from football.
Too much time from football. Precisely. That's the issue, right? And so that's why we're calling it structural, because the whole idea of student athlete isn't literally backwards. It is athlete student in every single respect. Sport is prioritized over education, and education is subordinated to sport, right? And let's there's more we could say about this, but let me just finish with the most really obvious. It seems like a really basic observation, but it's the most profound. 40 plus hours of football work every week is fucking exhausting. It is brutal. It is body destroying and brain destroying. And any of us, including me, who actually literally was able to become a professor at a university, would sleep through my own class. Okay, if I was put through those conditions, because it's just not possible to sustain attention. Finally, you're in an environment that's a little bit quieter, a little bit calmer. Your body's going to shut down. Yep. That's what our bodies do. But if that happens, you're not learning, which means you're not getting paid.
And then if grades suffer, maybe you lose your scholarship. But I remember reading in the intro when you guys introduced yourselves and kind of how it shaped your experiences from being, sports fans to going into academia and teaching students. Like Derek mentioned, someone from the football team when he's at South Carolina pretty much came and threatened him for trying to find a way to make sure the student passes, which is give him a good grade. We all know what he's doing. I remember that in high school happening. Coaches would try to talk to teachers all the time to make sure someone's passing. But they only did it at least in high school, I remember, they didn't really care about someone that wasn't a starter or a really good player that might be struggling. It was always like the player that's the better player, the starter. Because I remember one of my best friends didn't make grades and he didn't play, but they didn't care about trying to get him to pass, right? Because he wasn't a starter. So like, I remember just reading that in the beginning. I was like, that sounds exactly what they do in high school, and then it continues, right?
I'd even go one step further, and one of the things that our interviews revealed is that coaches would use anything that they could to get workers that they did not want on their team out of their team, especially with with the transfer portal. They'd use anything. They would use we can talk about how they would use drug testing to do that. They would use academic scores to do that. Basically anything they could. So if a student was struggling on in academics and the football player was not producing on the field, coaches would use that to get as one of the levers to get them out, to get them no longer playing for the team so that they can open up a scholarship for someone else, which is, again, that sort of key point that Nathan kind of echoed, is that the most significant impediment to an education for campus athletic workers, predominantly football, is having to do this arduous form of labor and all of the other things that the football program provides, including the coaches, including the strength and conditioning, including the overseers of a variety of kind when it comes to NCAA and compliance. All of that entire structure was the impediment to education, period. End of story.
And now to get on to my next question, kind of go into what we were talking a little bit already. Speaking of like those authority figures in football, like the head coach, other coaches, what is the role of these college coaches in these primary white institutions, as you refer them to, which they are, PWIs in the book? What is their role in this exploitation of the college football athletic workers? How do they replicate that overseer role in the plantation dynamics of college football? Now, I guess you could explain what plantation dynamics are too for anyone who doesn't know. And then how do they distribute that harm?
Yeah, there's a lot there, and so we'll try to work through some of it. I think that actually, in a way, Derek laid out earlier the plantation dynamics in the terms that are absolutely clearest, right? So just to very briefly echo that point, we were talking about a situation where it's very, very straightforward. Black people are vastly underrepresented at predominantly white institutions. That's why we call them that. It's not just that there's a lot of white people there. It's because if the population in the United States has approximately 13% black folks overall, we're talking about 5% of the population at these institutions is black. So less than half the representation that you would expect, right? That's the first thing. But then conversely, the football players are 55% plus black, right? So it's not even that hyperbolical to say that you're almost only admitting black people to do the sacrificial work of football in the context of college athletics. Okay, so that's the first piece here. But then there's all sorts of things that go along with that. So one of them, again, as Derek said, is the racial transfer of wealth, right? So we're having all this money that's being produced, the value being produced by these black athletes is flowing, not just to the institution in an abstract sense, right? But specifically to white people in particular jobs, overrepresented white head football coaches, overrepresented white, athletic trainers, overrepresented white athletic department administrators, university presidents, members of the sport media complex who cover these games. These are all overrepresented white groups. So that means that this sacrificial black, the only ones in this equation whose brains are being bludgeoned, the only ones whose lives are being physically destroyed are these black workers and white workers as well. But I'm saying the overrepresented black workers and all these white roles that are profiting directly from that, none of them have any of the risks involved whatsoever, right? So in terms of the distribution of harm and benefit, right, it's completely it's completely unjust and exploitative, right? And that to us is, I think, really fundamental of the plantation dynamics. We should be thinking of that in that material economic sense. But then on top of that, we also have frankly, we can talk about microaggressions, right? We can talk about the fact that these campuses are set up for white people. So when any black people are on them, they are treated as interlopers, as if they don't belong, as if they don't deserve to be there. And because of this, other black students who are there are treated automatically as if they're athletes. athletes.
Yeah,
right?
people just assume they're at school for being athletes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what that means is, what that actually signifies, right? That's a signifier that really means you don't belong here for real. I'm not saying that. That's bullshit. But like, that's what the message is when someone is like identified as an athlete. Oh, you're not a real student. You're an athlete, right? That's what you're here for. And that in itself is a microaggression, right? And the professors way too often duplicate those dynamics too, right? So there's this total way in which the environment is like, I like to use the language, as a Marxist, I like to use the language like it's alienating, right? It's like a profoundly alienating experience, but that alienation comes through race, right? It's the racial status that produces it. And there's an emotional harm that goes along with the physical harm. So all of these things are piled together. And then we're talking about the coach, right? That's what your question was about, the role of the coach. And you said that we like to talk about the coach as an overseer. And I appreciate you highlighting that language, because I think that's exactly it, right? Let's think along with, let's say, W.E.B. Du Bois, and let's think about this as like the long Civil War. It's not over, right? This is the whole point. Slavery, Jim Crow, we're just in the same continuum that we have always been in terms of racialized exploitation, racial capitalism in the United States, right? And one of the ways it's morphed, we have the prison industrial complex today, which is a really blatant way of understanding the ongoing violence and extraction from Black people in the United States. And we have college sports. It is absolutely, I would say, after the prison industrial complex, really the second most salient example of those dynamics today. And the white coach has a pivotal role because their job is to lead the extraction, and they are amply rewarded for it. You know, so like, here's a couple things that just like really galling to me that are from recent days. Okay, one is Donald Trump just came out and said he was like really annoyed that there's like a free market now in college sports, because this means that, you know, like, oh, we can't afford to pay these quarterbacks like $10 million a year. This is getting out of hand. Oh yeah, because we could afford with the free market to pay coaches, white coaches. We could afford to pay them $10+ million a year. That wasn't a problem.
To not coach.
That's the other piece I was going to bring up.
Buyouts.
We have two of them this year. More than $49 million each. Two coaches, right?
And
so
you guys mentioned these coaches in the books, which their salary and their buyouts weren't bought out yet, but they had that in their contract. And then this has happened with some of them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's the most galling part, because it's like, how can you claim that there isn't enough money to pay these athletes when coaches are being paid not to work, right? That's like the best job in this economy is being an out of work college football coach, because then you're sitting on the couch raking it in.
Brian Kelly, Franklin, there's a lot of, I'm missing other ones, but those are the ones that come to my head right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've often called Nathan and I have all, and we're not the only ones, have called coaches exploiters in chief in this system. Coaches have objectively the most power when it comes to actually tangibly changing the working conditions of campus athletic workers, which is how it actually plays out. So some of the tactics that they use in order to fulfill the system or reproduce this system, things like surveillance and discipline, right? They track the behavior, they track training data, they track academic choices, and they condition that. They mediate academic choices, bodily metrics, off-field movement. All of these things are surveilled.
What you eat, dietary.
Everything is. Control through dependency. We call this status coercion in the book. We can get into that in a little bit, but basically making campus athletic workers dependent upon them for future earning potential, for career aspirations, for upward mobility, and then controlling them as such. Scholarships, the future opportunities, medical access, which actually surprisingly, a little bit surprisingly, came out as incredibly important to us, that coaches were actually mediating medical access, which is horrifying to think, because some of these are long-term injuries that will affect one's ability to earn a living outside of football for the rest of their lives. And coaches are mediating that, which is horrifying.
Yeah, I think there was something with Penn State's Franklin, not from his resignation, but this past year about something with his players and, manipulating, pretty much making the doctors make sure they're playing and stuff, even though they shouldn't be playing. When
People should read up on that. Just Google search James Franklin trial, conflict of interest. You're going to have eye-popping stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to be honest, James Franklin, what we learned, one of the things is like seems to be more of the norm than an outlier. So the fact that coaches are entangled in that, we've written elsewhere in peer-reviewed article form that it's a severe conflict of interest that coaches are engaged in this process whatsoever. That coaches and medical doctors who like work for the team ostensibly, they should have, there should be no connection because of the conflict of interest that that leads to. And also, like, I think ideologically, like the disciplined subordination through or framed as like character building that coaches engage with, right? Like that institutions and coaches frame like discipline, they frame sacrifice, they frame pain endurance and like playing through injury as like moral virtues. So like not only do they do this like in a practical sense, they actually train that, and this happens throughout the entire system, like from playing as a Pee-wee and like Pop Warner all the way into college, that all these things are framed as character building, but they're actually subordination to a harmful thing. They're actually subordinate, and they're training docility and subordination to the coach. And also, one of the things that's really important that it has emerged even more out of the quote unquote liberalization of college football, like the expansion of name, image, likeness, the house settlement, all of these things that seem to be through progress, it actually has created this like these exit options that are also mediated by the coaching staff. So like, yeah, the transfer portal is great, but you know what happens? Coaches talk to one another in a whisper network, and you still have to be in favor of that coach in order to get an opportunity elsewhere. So sure, you might be like, yeah, I can go wherever I want. But yeah, but then Nick Saban gets on the phone and calls his buddy Ed and says, Ed, don't bring that guy. He's trouble. AKA he's like, he's whatever the problem is like that Nick might have with that person. Don't bring, then that is foreclosed. That opportunity is foreclosed. So coaches, exactly. Coaches have this not only tangible form or effect on the working conditions in the now, they also possess this incredible power to affect the future, not just in terms of income potential and upward mobility, but also livelihood and health, all of these things so the coach is the primary person and position that does this. Everyone else is tangential to that. The coach is the person that does that.
And then this also reminded me back to high school football and my experience. Like my coach, like Coach Strauss, he's like the legend high school coach for our high school in the area. I remember just the power he has as a coach. And then later on what happened, which I knew back then when I was playing about, you guys probably heard about this, me talking about it, when his daughter was the athletic trainer and she sexually assaulted players. And I know two of those players. One of them finally came out public. He made the NFL. He's actually my friend's brother, Sharice Wright. I was friends with his brother, Shaman Wright. Sharice Wright played for the Chargers. And he's the one, they did like an ESPN special like about it. But he's the only one that's gone public. I know the first person that encountered our coach's daughter, he joined the lawsuit, but he's not named. I know his name. I'm not going to say it, but that's one of my actual friends. Like, he was older than me. I was a freshman. He's a senior. I remember when that was happening, right? But now that this all came out, 2 years ago when the news came out, they knew. People knew. Like I'm saying, we knew when I was there that this was happening. But back then, I'm young. She's with the coach's daughter. Oh, like we thought it was cool, right? Because we just don't know shit back then. Like I didn't, I was just a young kid. Like, but we all knew about it. And now it comes out, and then we find out it kept happening after we graduated. It kept happening. She ends up going to the next school where our coach went to teach, because they made a new high school in our area. So a lot of kids that lived in this other city next to us, used to go to our school in the same school district, but now they made them their own high school. He ended up going coaching them, and she went over there and became the athletic director, and that's when this all came out. But she moved up by doing all this exploitation, all this harm to students. And I don't know, I haven't really checked an update on it, but now it's just kind of gone away. But now I feel like I went to Penn State High School, like the high school of Penn State. Like that's what it makes me think of, the whole Penn State scandal. And then
can I just say, sadly, like, just Miguel, let me just say, and sadly, the Penn's, like, because your analog to Penn State is obviously on point, but like the truth is, we've now learned in recent years, it's almost every fucking Big Ten school. Like, I mean, I'm not just saying it's, but like literally almost every Big Ten school has had a scandal with a medical practitioner. We know Michigan State. We actually have heard recently about Minnesota. We know about University of Michigan. We know about Ohio State, right? The fucking list goes on and on and on. And these are some of the most putatively distinguished institutions in the entire country.
And I know in your book, you guys spoke to a player where I guess they weren't practicing well and the coaches got mad and they made them like do like all these push-ups like on the concrete with their knuckles. That reminded me of something in high school. Like we didn't do it on concrete, but one time one of our players did something and got in trouble. And so like, you know, when schools have assemblies for the whole school. So what ended up happening, the coaches found out, this is when I'm a freshman on the freshman football team. We're barely starting. We're not like on the varsity. He found out this player did something. So instead of just punishing him, he punished the whole team. We all had to do like push-ups and all these like things in front of the whole school, like outside of the assembly, pretty much humiliating the whole team. And I'll never forget that.
No, and this is it. This is the abusive. This is the abusive dynamic.
It was normal.
That's built
We just
in.
accepted it because we got conditioned. Like, oh, this is what we gotta do. Yeah, keep going. I got something else to say after you say something.
No, that's good. I appreciate that point. And just because I want to riff off what you're saying, because one of the examples we have in the book, right? Just like, because people be like, okay, well, yeah, like they go through this stuff, like whatever, but then they're done. So like it's in the rearview mirror. This stays with people, man. Like the trauma that comes from this is like genuine. I'm not using that. I'm not throwing that word around. Like literal, actual trauma. We talked to one player, okay, whose experiences were so brutal during like essentially 3-a-days during training camp. And like, you know this, Miguel, but like for people who don't know much about training camp, this is like the period in advance of the season where everything is most intense. Players are like sequestered away from everyone else. And like everyone dreads this period of time because it's like, man, that's the almost like, it's like the systematized hazing essentially where they're meant to be like broken down and turned into the team that they're supposed to be according to the coaches.
Whoever doesn't survive doesn't make the team. It's kind of like that test. Yeah.
Exactly. Perfect. Exactly. So this guy, right? First of all, he almost died during one training camp. Like he passed out. He had this horrific experience in the showers and then he was like back playing the next day after this. But the thing that I really want to emphasize is not what happened that year or even any of the years he was playing. It was the fact that he literally would wake up every year during the season of training camp vomiting. He would wake up vomiting because of the trauma, his body remembering the trauma of training camp. That has stayed with him for the rest of his life. That is what we are putting hundreds of thousands of young men through.
Yeah, and they do Hell Week in high school. Like, and here in California, it gets hot in SoCal in the summer, and we were out there doing 2-a-days. Like, I remember throwing up. And then it's pretty much that test, like I'm saying, whoever survives kind of makes a team. And something I want to add, you guys mentioned it in the book. One of my past guests, she wrote a book. Hopefully I'll have her on. She did a book on college football players also. Dr. Tracy Canada talked about brotherhood, right? You guys mentioned that. That's something they used against you to condition you. That's what they did when I joined the freshman team. Because before, I never played football until high school. Because of my disability, so I never played, and then I probably should have never played. I've only played like baseball and basketball, so I never like played football like some of my friends in Pee Wee and stuff. So they kind of already knew about all that stuff. But yeah, like they ingrain that into your minds. Like the people that didn't make the team, that didn't survive Hell Week and didn't want to play anymore that freshman year, our head coach, Coach Telly, he told us, you can't be friends with those people anymore. They're not on your team. They're not your brothers. They didn't want to like, they don't want to put in that work with you guys. Like, so it literally, these two guys I knew from like middle school until that, they were best friends. I guess they were best friends from elementary. Like they went to a different elementary school than me. They were best friends. Their friendship literally ended because of that. Because one of them stayed on the team, the other one didn't. So he got ostracized. So pretty much the coaches were like, don't talk to those guys, those losers that didn't cut it. They didn't cut it on the team. They didn't want to be on the team. And I remember I stopped hanging out with people because of that. Because they pretty much condition you got to all hang out together. You guys are brothers. You're a team. And that continues in college. That continues in the NFL. But I think it gets ingrained in high school and college, obviously.
Yeah, that's horrifying. And honestly, like we're not the ones to really say that. Many others have said this. Johanna has made this point. But you can call it a family if you want, but there's another way. That's supposed to connote this idea, as you say, of brotherhood and love and tenderness and care. And this is obviously Tracy's point, like, because she talks about corporeal concern in her book, and the idea of that corporeal concern is that it's performed concern, right? Because the actual concern is for the performance. And so there's a way we can say that, families, though, they're not only defined by love. A lot of families are defined by abusive, harmful behavior, right? And that's really what the football family is all about. It's an abusive family.
And that just made me think of when I stopped playing my junior year, because my doctor's like, you shouldn't be playing. So I stopped, right? I didn't play those last 2 years, so a lot of those teammates stopped hanging out around me. And so, like, I used to hang out with the whole football team, right? So now I felt like an outsider. It was weird. Like, I didn't really care anymore at that point a little bit, but I still remember noticing it. I'm like, oh, you're not hanging out with me no more? Weird. Like, I've known you since, like, 7th grade. Like, we like all this stuff, but now because I'm not on the team, so I even felt that later when I stopped playing. But that's what they do. They ostracize you. They alienate you. They alienate you, the one that's not on the team, they alienate the actual football players on the team from their other friends, like going back to alienation. Just weird thinking about it.
Just to like, I urge listeners, if they're interested in this line of thinking, to Nathan mentioned it, to check out Tracy Canada's book, Tackling the Everyday Race and Nation in Big Time College Football. It's a fascinating account. We had her on our podcast at the End of Sport to talk about this, but definitely urge folks to check that book out, because it takes a different angle into college football. It's wholly ethnographic, but takes a different angle into college football that really parses out this kind of family rhetoric and the family narrative, and then expands that into a much deeper analysis and more nuanced analysis about football families and the labor that goes into it, that falls on other people as well, which is like fascinating. So just a shout out there.
And then you guys already kind of covered all this whole racial dynamics we were speaking about, but I had a little quick question. Do you want anything to add? Like, was there any differences you noticed with speaking with the black players as compared to did they speak about their white teammates? Was there any those plantation dynamics how did they differ between a white and a black player?
Sure. Yeah. I got a couple things I can add to that. One of the players I think really made a point of saying, the myth we have, and we know that this is true, right? Like, you don't have to have seen college football or been in a football locker room, but have you been in American popular culture? Have you watched the film Remember the Titans? That we have narratives in our society that say that football produces a melting pot, right? Like, the myth is the locker room is where people come together and we kind of transcend any forms of racial animus in society, right? I'm not claiming that that's true, but that is obviously the narrative. It's that's how we get this logic of post-racial America and so forth, right? That story is told over and over again. But what players told us is actually that the locker room remains a deeply, deeply segregated space, actually. And players are segregated often in the context of the locker room, and they are especially segregated when they leave the locker room, right? They return to completely different experiences of America, which is why we can never separate the experience of college football from racial capitalism in the United States more broadly, right? These things are one is imbricated in the other. This is part of a larger system. It reproduces this larger system. It doesn't actually make sense to talk about college football outside of the context of racial capitalism, right? We have to remember that. So I think that's one really important thing to keep in mind. And I honestly, even white players we talked to, I think that this was really instructive. They were like, look, we are experiencing a lot of the shit of college football. We are experiencing the economic exploitation. We are experiencing the physical brutality. We haven't talked that much about that, but just as a sidebar here, right? I think the most important point in framing why this sport is indefensible is that it is literally human sacrifice, right? We have the data now that tells us that everyone is dying from playing football in a way that is unconscionable, okay? So yes, that's affecting white players. So the economic stuff, the educational, all of that stuff is affecting white players. But even the white players we talked to, their position wasn't like, listen, why would you even like want to think about race? Like, look how bad we have it. They were like, no, actually, it's true. The black players are actually experiencing a worse form of of exploitation. And we'll get to this, but partly because of the thing that we're going to talk about called structural coercion, okay, which is like the fuel for this whole system, and they can acknowledge that. That is that they could see that by and large, not universally, but by and large, many of the black players were coming from conditions in terms of economic opportunities and socioeconomic status that really relied heavily upon college football as a form of class mobility, right? Leveraged class mobility to the extent that a lot of the white players were not. And that had a huge influence on the kind of experience that the players were having in the world of college football. And they could also see all of these issues around microaggressions and everything else. Like, it was very transparent that all of this was going on. So like at the end of the day, the white player at a predominantly white institution, right? Whatever they are, the University of California, Duke, Michigan. I mean, if you think about these institutions, if you're a white guy on that campus, people aren't like, why are you here? Yeah. They're like, yeah, we love you. We love sports. We love you. Like, you're like, I really hope you hang out with me because that's going to boost my social status. You know what I mean? Like, that's the vibe for the white athlete on these campuses, but that wasn't the vibe for the black players.
You guys, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the status and structural corrosion in college, with college athletic workers. Like, what is that?
Yeah, so in the book we developed two, or we build on two concepts that have been previously used in sociology, namely Aaron Hatton's idea of status coercion, which is basically, to put it very reductionist and rudimentary, is the ability of someone in an authority position to control or to coerce someone through their ability to influence their future status, their future in anything. In this case, we use it as a frame in which we can understand the power, the structural coercive power that the NCAA institution, but also the people within that institution, the people who are employed within that institution and all around that institution, to influence the future earning potential, the future livelihood, the future living conditions of campus athletic workers. We talked about this in terms of the power that the coaches have to do this. Some examples of what a coach would be able to do is talk amongst the whisper network and make it so a campus athletic worker can't get opportunities to play elsewhere should they no longer play for their Power 5, Power 4 football program. They also simply cannot play players who, for a whole host of reasons, as we looked at in the book, it could be as simple as a disagreement in the locker room, or the perception that an athlete isn't quote unquote trying hard enough, or is talking back to coaches, or is an issue at practice. All of these things, the coach can simply not play these athletes because there is this quote unquote next man up mentality that actually does exist. There pretty much always is a next person who can play in that position. And they use this in order, or they do so in order to prevent that person from, or at least a byproduct of that is to prevent that person from having opportunities to showcase themselves, to maybe showcase themselves to professional teams who might want to see tape on that person. They can also put that person into objectively more dangerous positions on the field. Like, it can get as micro as that, like where a coach puts a running back on in a bad position with bad play, et cetera, to put that person in some sort of danger. This all goes that coaches predominantly and coaching staffs have a huge amount of status coercive power to make campus athletic workers accept not only the risky conditions, but also the fact that they are being exploited. So what is often framed as consensual. Well, the players signed up for it. In one way, like they may have signed up for it, and I'll get to like the reasons why someone would play football in a moment. When they get there, they also quote unquote consent to a whole host of harmful things. But is it truly consent when the coach basically says, I have your whole future, your whole earning potential, your ability to go pro in my hands? Is it truly consent that you're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to do all these. I am going to do 3 a days. I am going to like do the push-ups on jagged concrete. I am going to do all this stuff. Are you truly consenting to that? We question that. And I think we do so through this idea of status coercion. The next question, or the next framing that people often use, is like, well, players signed up to play football. They like playing football. It's totally consensual. That we take down like at a more topographical, more macro view in terms of this idea of structural coercion, which we borrow from sociologist Jill Fisher, who looked at informed consent in the medical field to show that there are a bunch of structural reasons why people would consent to harmful things in medicine, harmful experiments, for instance, or harmful procedures. The same thing can be said about college football players and campus athletic workers more generally, that there is an entire structure, namely racial capitalism, that causes or that conditions people's quote unquote desire to play football, college football, and subject themselves to what is objectively an incredibly harmful sport that damages their bodies and brains. When someone has a structural lack of opportunity due to racism, white supremacy, and racial capitalism, that their future opportunities to, say, attend college, for one, to get upward social mobility and get amazing jobs, etc., things that should be rights to all, when those opportunities are foreclosed by the system, no shit someone would be willing to sacrifice their body and their mind to play college football when college football presents the lottery for them, when college football presents the possibility to do this, to go professional, to earn money. And campus athletic workers we talk to notice this. They were well aware of this and would acknowledge the fact that many of them would acknowledge the fact that they simply would not have played if they had opportunities to attend college otherwise. But those opportunities are foreclosed in a system of racial capitalism where our primarily white institutions disproportionately create barriers for Black and racialized people to attend. And then our system echoes that after the fact in terms of job applications, et cetera, all of these things, that it makes us and it made us question whether or not this was truly consensual. In a system of status, when you are being structurally and status coerced into this, is it actually consensual? Did you actually sign up for it? Or is this just the best, you're doing the best, or you're entering, it's the best alternative, if you will, the best of your options, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. And I have almost nothing to add, but just to underline that we are not saying that players are dupes or are ignorant or anything like that. Okay, they're literally making a cost-benefit analysis where very often they understand the things we just described, and it actually is a rational choice that the vast majority of human beings would make under the same circumstances. And they literally told us, I'm scared, but I'm doing this for my family. How could I not give my family this opportunity, right? And what's sick about this is that we live in a society that makes them make that choice.
It just, you're not given much choices when you come from a working class, poor background. Even as me as a Mexican, a Chicano, like Latino, we don't really, and then it's even worse for Black people, like, the choices are really like play sports and make it big, or be an entertainer, like in music, join the military. Those are the ways to get out, or, you're just going to work some job like most people. Where,
and coaches even said this. This is what's so sick. Even during recruiting, they'd be like, listen, you're going to come play for me, you're going to go work at the gas station.
Exactly.
I mean, they said stuff like that to them.
they're pretty much saying, oh, you're not going to amount to nothing unless you come play this violent sport with and make me lots of money. Yeah.
Exactly.
This actually reminded me, I'm thinking maybe the scholar who talked about these concepts of structural and status coercion might maybe got influenced by like Antonio Gramsci and his whole hegemony with coercion and consent, because that's what he talks about, in there in a political sense, Marxist sense. But that's what this.
Yeah, I definitely think that if some of this was more explicitly Marxist, we would hear the sort of Gramscian approach come out. Perhaps we would.
No, but this is clearly a Marxist analysis. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's a Marxist analysis, and we're like. I teach courses on this. Okay, that essentially our entire view of the world is shaped by a liberal logic that says that we are like in a free and fair environment where people are choice-making agents, right? And that's what justifies the entire system. And we have this myth of meritocracy and everything else, right? That's literally the logic of the free market, right? And the free market is the, most disingenuous aspect of this freedom, because what the free marketeers are telling us is that we are exchanging our labor for a wage because that's what we want to do. That's desirable. And actually, the reason why we are even in that position is because, like, apparently our ancestors were really lazy and engaged in riotous living, and like the capitalist class, they were really hardworking, and that's why the people who are lazy are working like 15 jobs at the same time and never have a moment to themselves, and the people who are super hardworking never had to work and actually spend all day on Twitter, like pretending to be really intelligent, right?
Elon Musk.
It's a lie, right? The whole thing is a lie. And that's actually to me, like that's the core of what Marxist analysis teaches us, is that capitalism as a system is predicated fundamentally on coercion. And once we shift that lens, what we understand is that although liberalism claims to be a philosophy of freedom, right? It does. That's the rhetorical claim. Actually, that is untruthful. And Marx is not a philosophy of unfreedom, right? Which is exactly how he's framed in the American political tradition, right? That's exactly what's bad about communism. That's why it's a specter, communism or whatever else, because like we're the land of the free, and that over there is unfreedom, authoritarianism, etc. No, that's bullshit. Marxism is an alternative understanding of how to achieve freedom. It is also a philosophy of freedom, but it is a philosophy of freedom that acknowledges the genuine constraints built into capitalism and says we have to dismantle those if you want to produce the conditions for genuine freedom. And I mean, look, we're using different words to say that exact thing here.
And now I want to talk to this. Your last chapter was really great, kind of that experience. It kind of, you probably maybe didn't expect it to happen and ended up, right, happening. Just that COVID-19 season, you guys talk about it, 2020, college football season. Like, how did COVID affect that season, that exploitation and harm that you talked in your book? What did you guys learn just from studying that specific season for this project?
Oh man, COVID is so influential. Okay, like it's been really memory hold because we're just jumping from one trauma to the next, right? And that's not to diminish any of the subsequent traumas that have been occurring, because each one is like world historical, honestly, in its magnitude. But like, yeah, we've all lived through a period of immense, life-altering, world-shaking trauma. That was the COVID era, and it's the thing that brought Derek and I together in the first place, right? Like our podcast project started that year. And one of the things, there you go. But one of the reasons though, like a lot of people are like at home and like they wanted to start a podcast. I get it. But one of the reasons, and you probably shared this, Miguel, one of the reasons why we started a sports podcast at that time is because a lot of the things we had been thinking about in terms of like what was bad about sport, but were more submerged, became surfaced by COVID, right? Yep. These ideas about how like athletes would be physically sacrificed in order to produce commodity spectacle for capital and to reproduce the identities of fans, which are like really core to our thinking about sport more broadly. I mean, it was blatant in the context of COVID, right? Like you literally have athletes being treated as essential workers at a moment when like a lot of other people are being told that they need to protect themselves, but college students in the moment when other college students are being told that they need to be protected, they're precious young people who can't be allowed to be around a virus, which I agree with, right? College athletes will be like, but not you though. That doesn't apply to you. You still have to make money for this institution, even though you're supposedly a student first and an athlete second. And by the way, this isn't just an abstract exercise. They were all systematically subjected to the virus. Team after team had outbreak after outbreak. Clemson, University of North Carolina, right? And folks, this is what gets lost in our memory of that period, I think. This is pre-vaccine. Okay,
Yeah.
like we have all these fucking bullshit debates about vaccines. The vaccines are the thing that allow us to have bullshit debates about vaccines, because the vaccines saved so many lives that like we're still here to talk about the fact that like we're post-COVID, whether or not that's true. But like we can only have that conversation because of vaccines that exist, right? But these players were subjected to COVID before the vaccine. They got the full brunt of it, and that's what our universities were willing to do to them. And that was, really powerful for us to see. But you know what else? It was incredibly consciousness raising for the athletes themselves. I actually think that, sadly, there's a pro and a con. Like we were surging towards real labor activism in the space of college athletics, right? Real unionization. The Dartmouth players actually voted to unionize. We all know that kind of backstory, and they've backed off that because of the Trumpist NLRB. They're afraid to make a bad precedent. But everything was surging in a positive direction there. And I would say that COVID is the single most important factor, because all of these athletes who didn't quite have enough impetus to sort of take on that labor identity, because there's so much pressure on the college athlete. They're there for such a short period of time. It's what Derek talked about, the status coercion. It's so risky to risk your status for labor activism when you're not going to be in this profession for 10, 20 years. You're there for this short window. How can you spend that window organizing for something that's going to kind of prevent you from having a professional career? But COVID was the thing that allowed us, honestly, to get past that barrier, because they were like, this exploitation is so outrageous. It's so overwhelming that none of us can avoid seeing the fact that if we don't get together and do something about it, they're going to kill us.
It's not hyperbole. I just remember that season, some players, opted out not to play, and that kind of derailed their future, even on a team. It was like what we're talking about. I talked earlier when I'm in high school, and you didn't survive Hell Week. You couldn't survive. You couldn't tough it out. Just the same stuff is getting applied when there's a pandemic that's killing people. And it was right when it started, so we don't know anything about it. Like you're saying, there's no vaccine yet. It's the unknown. We were in the unknown. We had no idea what's going to happen in the future, because this whole new disease came and was killing people. And here they are going to play football. You're in a locker room with hundreds. In college, you got 100 players on your team. Maybe more if there's injured players, and then trainers, coaches, just in a little locker room while COVID is, spreading everywhere. I remember just even the pro leagues, there's no people in the stadium attending the games, but they still ended up having the games because all that profit they make from the TV deals, which college makes so much money off that too. They might make more than the pros because they have all these different networks. They make a lot of money just off TV deals. So that was a driving, that profit driving motive of them wanting to keep going, because you got those TV contracts. You got to make that money. But I just remember that season in general, just as a sports fan, questioning my own fandom. I'm still a sports fan. I still have my contradictions, I feel, but those few months where there was no sports because everything was shut down, I remember being man, what am I going to watch? What am I going to do? Because I'm so used to my whole life watching sports, right? You guys talk about in your intro, growing up as sports fans, you get you do get a parasocial relationship with sports. And I remember what am I going to do? And actually a month or two in, I'm this isn't too, I survived without watching sports. Kind of gave me that moment, hey, if this ever happens again, I'll live without watching sports on TV, being a sports fan. It wasn't the end of the world. And then it came back, but I just remember thinking about that, just questioning my own fandom. So that season was just crazy. And college players, some players just, after that season were ostracized if they didn't want to play. So I remember reading about that when it was happening, certain teams. Even in the NBA, when they went back to the bubble, I remember one of the Laker players, some players decided not to go. I don't remember them, like, players critiquing a player, but I just, reading fans, like, comments and stuff. Oh, they can't tough it out. They're not sacrificing for the team. I'm like, dude. I just think of, it was Avery Bradley on my Lakers. Like, he decided not to go to the bubble. He's, like, one of the only ones on the Lakers, and Lakers end up winning the championship that year. But I just remember fans getting so mad, like, why isn't he on the team? Why is he not playing? Why isn't he not sacrificing? Like, he's not a team player. Like, those are the things people are talking about, even just fans. Just even that harm fans cause as just being spectators of a sport,
Yeah, and so many, and well, it's the fan as consumptive unit too that is particularly harmful. Yeah, so it's like they're like a different approaches to sport that are on this continuum of being like directly complicit in harm and being like a little bit more understanding, and I would say less complicit. Like, I don't think there's an inherent harm in being a fan of sport, for instance, although it's contradictory. Like, in a true Marxist analysis, we're workers. We are the proletariat who need or who yearn for some sort of something to pacify our own alienation. We've been disconnected from the product of our labor, and we need to satisfy some social connection through, as you mentioned, these parasocial relations, or through finding something so that we can deal with our own shitty working conditions. Very rudimentary Marxist lesson, or a couple paragraph there. So like that isn't inherently bad per se. It's complicit, absolutely, but it's not inherently like, it doesn't necessarily need to be inherently bad. But when you get into becoming a consumptive unit, I think, or you use sport as only that to pacify at the risk of or without acknowledging all of the harms that you are part and parcel to, that you are complicit in, that's when it can become harmful. For instance, if you're using, say, sports betting as a sort of opiate in sort of Marxist to deal with the alienation, when you're engaging in fantasy sports to the point where you're going on social media and like making fun and like saying these things to athletic workers as if they're like, and making fun of them and like basically besmirching them and saying that they're saying all these bad things about them without realizing that these people are like humans. I think that there's also a line between like the degree to which these people are being harmed in their actual pursuit or in their athletic labor. So in the context of the COVID pandemic, there is no way to do that ethically, morally. Bubble, no bubble. There's no way to like, and I think that's what you're pointing to, where if this were to happen again, perhaps people would question their complicity and be like, I'm not watching this because these people are putting themselves at too much harm. In the context of football at large, take away COVID-19 completely, I think, Nathan, I view that as an ethical you can never come back from that. It is a sport that simply should not be played for ethical and moral reasons. You're watching the sacrifice of human bodies and minds, and there's no way to change that. The foundational goal of that is to destroy people's bodies and brains. That is the inevitable byproduct. Then there's a continuum of sports that do similar, but not to that degree. Hockey, I'd put on that. For us Canadian folks, hockey's pretty damn high up there on the harm continuum. But something like basketball is much less, even though there is physical sacrifice, even though there is harm. I'm not suggesting there's no harm in basketball. The degree of harm to one's body and mind is much lower on that continuum. You've got sports like MMA, mixed martial arts, boxing, that I would put very much up there with college football and with football in general. And I simply do not participate and partake as a consumptive kind of unit in those. I don't participate in those sports as consumer because that's too much for my own complicity. And I think we all have to have these internal dialogues with ourselves and be real and honest with ourselves in terms of our degree of complicity, just like we are all complicit in things like climate change and all of the other things that ruin our world around us. We have to participate in many of these things because we're products of capitalism. We have to live in capitalism. But the degree to which we participate in these things needs to be questioned and is very much a political, ethical, and moral imperative. And we have to explore it on those grounds because there's a fundamental difference between flying in a private jet and driving a car down the street to work because you have to do that because you have to sell your labor. We can't compare those two things. And we shouldn't get in the world of comparing those because then it just becomes, what about is it? Like, what about this? What about that? What's allowed? No, I think like let's acknowledge the continuums of harm. That was a big, long, like sidetrack for what but I think that's kind of that's what I learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's like, yes, there is that line that we can't go over and we should never go over again because it's too harmful.
Now to kind of, I guess, switch topics here, but really want to talk about it that just came out. You guys just had a journal article with other scholars, other journalists, I believe, were all like part of this article. Both of you were part of it. Settler colonialism, genocide, athleticide, the destruction of sport in Palestine. Can you guys discuss this article? I think it just came out like last week.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start, and then I'm sure Nathan has a lot of thoughts that Nathan would share on this. But the genesis of this paper that was just published, free, open access. So if you want to go look at it, settler colonialism, genocide, athleticide, the destruction of sport in occupied Palestine is available free, no paywall, nothing, at the Sociology of Sport journal. And the genesis actually came while. So I've long read Edward Said. I'm kind of an academic descendant of Edward Said through and one of the quotes that stood out for me particularly was, it's actually the first couple of words in this paper, and that's, there's no neutrality. There can be no neutrality or objectivity about Palestine. There's no indifference, no objectivity, no neutrality, because there is simply no room for them in a space that is as crowded and as overdetermined as this one. And that struck me as, what are we doing as sports scholars who don't have particular interest or haven't had scholarly histories writing about Palestine? What can we do in this moment that is so overdetermined, that is so impossible to kind of get over, but is so important and so vital as a political imperative? When it comes to, like, we are talking about literal genocide. We are talking about the genocide of Palestinians at the hands of the Israeli state, and funded by NATO, by all the members of NATO, and supported in so many possible ways. What can we do as sports scholars in the little field that we have, which is like sociology of sport? And that drew me, Nathan, our colleague Chen, to get together and talk about what we were seeing is in relation to sports explicitly. And this is what we were seeing, a strong pattern through I should note, the very minuscule media that actually was coming out of Gaza, that we were seeing this trend and pattern of athletics being targeted, being what we view as systematically targeted and explicitly targeted by the IDF, by a variety of senior leaders in the Israeli government. And I view that as an avenue in through which we can take the advocacy work that we do outside of sociology of sport, but bring it into our kind of discipline as a call to do this work, as a call to make this an imperative, to not sit around under the guise of neutrality and objectivity, all the things that prevent counter status quo discussions around these things, and do something. So in this exploratory analysis, we trace out this modality of genocide as we see it, which is athleticide, which is the systematic obliteration of sporting cultures and athletics through the killing, the maiming, the detention of athletes, the disabling of athletes, of coaches, of officials, of staff, administrators, etc. All of these things that result in the destruction of athletic athletes, athletic history, athletic culture, all of these things that are central to the cultural apparatus of Palestinians. And that's what we set out to do in this piece with 22 scholars and some preeminent scholars, including past NAS presidents, the current NAS, North American for the Society for the Sociology of Sport president, who are on this piece as well, to trace out some of that as an admittedly exploratory analysis, but not exploratory insofar as it is not valid or widely empirical, but by the very reason that Israeli forces have made it very difficult, if not impossible, to not only understand the true extent of this genocide in terms of number of people who have died, who have been injured, who have been maimed, etc., arrested, detained, the amount of infrastructure that's been completely destroyed in Gaza and West Bank. Not only is that, but it's impossible to get full reporting on the extent to which athletics has been harmed, and athletics and athletes and athletic infrastructure, because very little information can get out. So it's exploratory insofar as it's as robust as you possibly can get, and is tracing out this pattern, the pattern of athletes being arrested, detained, injured, killed, maimed, etc., and also importantly athletic infrastructure. And this follows previous work that has looked at scholasticide in the same way, which has looked at how the education system in Palestinian and occupied Palestine has been dismantled, bulldozed, challenged, etc., by Israeli forces for a long time. And one of the corollaries of, or one of the outcomes of that is a challenge to translate knowledge and to have Palestinians able to communicate about themselves through education. And that's part of self-determination. That's part of national identity. It makes it more difficult to do those things. And we, as sports scholars, think it's equally, or I wouldn't say equal, it is just as legitimate to look at how athletics has been targeted in the same way as universities, as schools, as places of knowledge, knowledge custodians. All of these things have been attacked. So too have sports. One example that I'll just briefly mention is how Yarmouk Stadium has been demolished or was demolished by Israeli forces. Yarmouk Stadium is central to Palestinians in Gaza. It's a cathedral of sport, if you will. We have many of these in North America, where our sporting institutions are so vital to our identities as people and so vital to our history. Yarmouk Stadium destroyed and then used as what is described as an internment camp, and a place where people are being hoarded into for further to be further to face much deeper forms of genocide from the Israeli government. So using that stadium as a kind of launch pad, you can easily see how sports can be used as a modality through which genocide can and has taken place in this genocide, or in the case of occupied Palestine. So that's the kind of genesis of that piece. I don't know, Nathan, do you want to add a little bit more? I don't know what I left for you.
Yeah, no. So listen, I have to say that for the first year of this genocide, I had somewhat of a misguided notion, which is that sport was comparatively insignificant in the context of, the most extreme forms of harm imaginable, essentially, right? Like, it's like, I obviously my focus is on sport, but like my horror was just at the scale of, the atrocities essentially that Israel was committing. And so it was like hard for me even to think about sport in that context. But I actually think that was wrong. And I've come to understand that perspective was wrong, not to in any way diminish that point about the atrocities, but rather because actually sport is an essential part of culture and cultural identity. And so what I was not realizing was that the obliteration of Palestinian athletic identity is a vital part of Israel's project to eradicate Palestinian people, which is the genocidal project. That is what genocide is. That is what cultural genocide is trying to erase people's existence off the face of the earth so that they can't see themselves or be seen, right, as people, as human beings. And sport is so central in that. And actually, we have the privilege, I don't always like to use that word. Sometimes we like that divorces us a little bit from the kind of materialist analysis I want to get into, but I think this is exactly the moment for talking about privilege. We have the privilege as people who have got credentials in the context of sport, right? We're like sociologists of sport. We have academic titles and so forth that allow us, the people want to talk to us about sport. People will listen to us when we talk about sport, right? That's actually an opportunity for us to actually do something, right? That's the point. Not just talk, but actually do something. So one huge part of this project then has been, right, to articulate what is being done to Palestinians through sport in the context of this genocide, as I've just, and Derek has at length been discussing. But the other thing, right, that I think is the logical extension of this argument, and it's maybe the most important part, is that we cannot be complacent ever, right? We should all retain a desperation when it comes to this ongoing, whether or not we're talking about a ceasefire or not, this ongoing genocide. And you know what? Just like Palestinians identify themselves through sport, so do Israelis. Right? The fact is, when Israelis receive recognition on the international sporting stage, that does something for them from the standpoint of identity. It launders their nation's legitimacy. It launders their state's genocidal project. Because if we're saying that South Africa was not allowed to participate in sport, but they're an apartheid state, and that Russia is not allowed to participate in sport, but they're an imperialist and, deeply violent state, but Israel is allowed to participate in sport, right? That's the international community making a claim, in a way tacitly endorsing Israel's genocide. And that creates an enormous imperative to ban Israel from global sport, right? And that is something that actually we can all, no matter where we reside in this world, that is something that we can all participate in, okay? And we view, in a way, I view this paper as a kind of like scholarly justification for the movements that we should all be engaging in. And of course, there's always backlash, so it's helpful to have text, peer-reviewed text and so forth. You can point to and say, I'm not anti-Semitic, okay? This is a well-established fact that Israel is committing genocide and that genocide has to do with sport, and that's why the Davis Cup shouldn't happen in Canada. Israel should not be hosted by Canada in the Davis Cup, and we did try to organize around that. And that's why Indonesia should ban Israel from getting visas to participate in the World Gymnastics Championships. And that's why Norway and Italy should have done more and should have actually refused to play Israel in their World Cup qualifiers, although I'm glad that they dunked all over them on the pitch and everyone had a free-for-all with that because that was very bad for Hasbro. So they made the best of a situation. But you know what? Fucking UEFA absolutely should be prohibiting them. And you know who's doing something about it? Ireland's doing something about it. Ireland is going to force UEFA to have a vote on this subject. And that's what my point is. No matter where you are, this stuff is all actually grassroots. When it comes to sport, it's literally just people who care about sport in their countries paying attention to when they are coming into contact with Israel in international sport and starting to talk about it, starting to do something about it, starting to meet other people and making movements everywhere to ban Israel from international sport. And if we do that, we will prevent the normalization of this genocide. It is actually one of the only sources of leverage that regular people everywhere in the world have to intercede in this genocide. So we should be taking sport and athleticide exceptionally seriously.
Yes, and my first episode back, Najee Ali pointed out the same thing, like we could use sport as that tool, that sport as a weapon. We could use it as a tool to push back against this genocide, to make change, make this genocide stop. Because like you're saying, if they're putting, they're recognizing Israel in all these international sporting mega events, they're legitimizing the genocide. But by banning Israel from these sports institutions, these global sports spectacles, that's one way for us to end. I will not say we're going to end the genocide just because of sport, but it's one vehicle to get people to buy into that, like even just normal people that are just like sports fans, like that might have not been as maybe don't know anything about what's going on. They should, but Palestine and the genocide.
And Miguel, if you censure Israel in sports, because this is why I'm so extreme. You're right. Banning Israel from sports is not the thing that materially, literally ends genocide. But the thing is, essentially, no states in the world. I mean, there's like there are some exceptions. I shouldn't be too, but in the global north, almost no states have taken any concrete steps to censure Israel and hold Israel accountable, right? We know this. If sport is a tipping point, right? If sport is the thing where they actually have to take a concrete step, that actually gets them past whatever that border is, or that foundation where they just haven't been willing to do anything. As soon as you get past that one step, you break that kind of taboo, suddenly we can have arms embargoes. We can have real state censure. We can have all the things that do in the most concrete imagine. If we stop giving them weapons, if the United States and Canada stop giving weapons to Israel, it's over now. This second, that's it. It's just done. Right? And I do believe you stop Israel's participation in sport, that is the first, or could be the first step in stopping everything else.
That's a great way to end it. I don't know if Derek wants to say something. Nope. All right. So that was a great way. I love Nathan's passion to talk about this. You guys have been, both of you, talking about this on your podcast, The End of Sport. Encourage everyone, if you don't, some of you have probably already listened to them. You have some listeners that are the same, but I know some people haven't checked your podcasts out. There's always those people. Check out their podcast, The End of Sport. They have several episodes on all these issues. Palestine. There's been a lot of us have been doing episodes the last 2 years. Even that I didn't record for over a year. The last 4 episodes I talk about Palestine, because that's literally the most important issue in the world today, right now. So I encourage everyone to check out their podcasts and all these great topics that they talk about. Check out their book, The End of College Football. I'll post a link to their book. And then I'll put the link to the article as well that you guys were a part of. But any last words before you guys leave?
No, just thank you so much. We're huge fans. Love to see that you're back and putting out some more content. So it's great. I'll be tuning in for sure. Well, not to this episode. I hate hearing my own voice, but to the others.
That's how I am.
Thanks so much for having us.
Episodes. Oh yeah, I love it. Thank you for coming on. I know you guys are busy. Again, check out their podcast, The End of Sport Podcast, with Derek, Nathan, and Johanna. And then also check out their book, The End of College Football. It's a great book, and they just won an award. So it's been recognized by a lot of scholars to be a great book as well. Not that you need that recognition, but it helps. So I appreciate it. We'll do this again. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.